Good morning. Good crowd today for the Iwo Jima presentation. It's always good to have people come out. And great that you're willing to come out on a hot day, which it is. We've got the fan going close to maximum speed. We don't want to blow anybody away, so it won't be 100%. So if you, all who can, if you please rise in prayer. Lord, our most holy Father, we give you great thanks today. Thanks for your creation. Thanks for the people who are attending. Thanks for our volunteers. Thank you for people who've served this country. We give you thanks for the Bronstein Foundation, the foundation that supports this activity. We give you thanks for the food that they have provided. Please, we ask always that you guide us in all that we do. We ask for wisdom. We ask for courage. We ask for strength. And we ask this for the leaders of our country, for the leaders of our state and local governments, that through the wisdom that you provide them, that we would continue to live in a country where we are free. We ask this in your name and give you great thanks. Amen. Amen. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So please join with Larry Head. He will be singing a cappella, as he normally does, the Star Spangled Banner. Larry needs to come this way because his speaker will get feedback unless he gets on this side of the speakers.
Okay, I think a cappella means I won't wear a hat. Please join me. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave for the land of the free and the home of the brave?
All right, it's time for some announcements. I mentioned the Bronstein Foundation sponsors this activity. And we're very blessed today that from the Bronstein Foundation, we have the old national representative that sits on their board, Mark Chandler. Mark, would you stand up? We truly are grateful that the Bronstein Foundation supports this program. They have a number of organizations that wish to receive funds from this group. Next, Lunch and Share. There's been a program change. And originally, Corey Holland, weapons officer on F-15, was going to speak. But he's unable to speak, and in his place, Don Ballard, a living Medal of Honor winner, will be here. So he's going to be at our next Lunch and Share. He lives in Indianapolis. And in addition to being at the Lunch and Share, we are working on another speaking time for him at the Wartime Museum. So please look in the newsletter to see how we finalize that. But Don, I think, would be a great speaker to have. So our speaker today, speaking on Iwo Jima, is Bob Hagopian. Bob lives in Westfield, Indianapolis. Bob is a retired firefighter, retired minister, retired chaplain, and currently he's a full-time chaplain with the Corsair Care Hospice. So I'm going to give it over to Bob. Bob is, at the end of his presentation, he's going to ask for questions. And when he asks for questions, Bob will repeat the question. So we're not going to pass out microphones. Just make sure Bob hears the question. He will repeat it. Bob?
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. My wife, Chris, and I are very happy to be here. We drove up here, down here, all the way from Westfield, Indiana, which is north of Indy, and we barely made it. I think the good folks here were sweating some bullets, but we got here, and an incredible team that you have of volunteers that have set up all this incredible audiovisual. Let's give them a round of applause, please. Okay, can you hear me out there? All right, is it too loud or too quiet? My goodness, I've never been A-OK. No. Well, thank you all for inviting us here. The reason that Chris and I are here is because last summer, late summer, Chris bought 2 tickets for the Sherman tank ride. Unfortunately, she wore open-toed shoes, so she couldn't ride, so I got to go twice. Now, maybe I should have Chris to tell the story, but one day we're sitting on the sofa watching TV at home, and I just came out with this. I said, Chris, you know what's my favorite tank? Now, all you ladies out there can imagine your eyes would be rolling too, right? You have a favorite tank, she said. I said, yes, I do. It's the Sherman, the M4, in all its variants, is my favorite tank. Matter of fact, when I had my church office, I served the church for 19 years, I had a model of a Sherman tank and a Willie G on my desk. Probably the only pastor anywhere that had a model of a Sherman tank on his desk. There's many reasons I love the Sherman tank. It's because of the brave men who fought him and who knew that in Europe they could probably take on Panzer IV, but they not alone could take on a Tiger or a Panther. But that didn't stop them from serving and fighting and dying so that all of us could enjoy, and not just us, the whole world could have freedom. Thank you. And that's why I love the Sherman tank. I also love the looks of it too, I have to say this. But I don't pretend to be an expert on all the variants, so please don't ask me questions about that. But I'm here today to talk about the Battle of Iwo Jima. Now, I do want to preface everything by saying I'm an amateur historian. I may not be able to have all the answers to all your questions, and I apologize for that. But there's this thing out there called Google. So you can look there if I don't have the answer. And I might be wrong, too, because I'm a human being. I'm a sinner like we all are. And I make mistakes. But you know what I wanted to do in starting off this presentation? I want to say a special thank you to all of you veterans. And a special salute. Now, if you don't mind, you don't have to stand up, you don't have to come up here, but if you could put your hands up, all those who are veterans who have served in our armed forces, no matter where, no matter when. Stateside, fully deployed. Let's give them all a round of applause. We would not be here if it wasn't for these men and women. And you know the old joke that says, if we didn't win World War II, we'd probably be speaking German or Japanese right now. That's a historical fact. It's not just historical. And every war since World War II, our servicemen and women have stood for us and stood for the people that they were defending and the lands they were liberating. So all of you, thank you very much. And may God continue to bless you and your families who love you and who bring you healing every day. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you. I'm titling my presentation, A Reflection on the Battle of Iwo Jima. So as I said, and a reflection, if those of you who go to church, if your pastor says to you, I'm giving a sermon, or would you like me to give you a reflection? Go for the reflection. It's shorter. So the point I'm making in this is that I'm not a historian and expert, but the Battle of Iwo Jima and the Marines who fought there and died there are my heroes. And there's a reason for that. It's because of this guy. That's my dad. Captain Robert C. Hagopian. He was Chief Statistical Officer on Iwo Jima with the 20th and 5th Air Forces. And he's the reason I'm here. Literally, I mean, I couldn't have been born without him. But he always told me, when he was on the island and he had this incident where he went swimming in the ocean and the undertow took him and he thought he was going to drown. And he said to me, I prayed to God to save me, and he did. He swam for the shore, made it onto the volcanic ash beach. And he said, I might have died right there and you wouldn't be here. It's very true. Obviously, I did not inherit his hair. He had that hair till the day he died. It was completely white by then. But this is a man who I love and who taught me so much about the value of service, the value of freedom, the value of America, our Constitution, our Bill of Rights, but especially the value of all those who have served and are serving. I was a firefighter for 15 years. I've done a lot of different things. If you added up all the years, I'd be over 100. Most proud of being a firefighter. Sorry, Lord. But my daddy, I went with him to so many veterans conventions and events. And matter of fact, because he served on Iwo Jima, he had befriended a lot of the Marines who had been on the island when he was there. He arrived on the island the night after they had declared the island secure. I think it was March 14, 45, I may be wrong, or 17. The night before he arrived, the Japanese, who were still in the caves, came up to the surface in captured Marine uniforms, pretending to be drunk, went into the camp where the fighter pilots were, bivouac where they were sleeping and slit the throats of I don't know how many of them before they were discovered and killed. That was the night before my dad arrived on the island. So calling the island secure was just a word. Japanese were still in the tunnels. Matter of fact, you know the year the last Japanese holdouts finally surrendered on Iwo Jima? Anybody know that? No, not back in the 60s, but you're right. In the 60s, there were Japanese on some of the islands that had been there. Can you imagine that being out on it for that long? That's right, they did. 1949 was when the last Japanese surrendered on Iwo Jima. So those guys were down there, and my dad was sleeping on that island every night, and he had a .45 under his pillow and a carbine by his side. So I'm dedicating this presentation to him. I hope you don't mind, because he's my dad. I mean, I'm also dedicating it to all the Marines too, but especially to him. He went on to become a JAG officer, by the way, in the occupation, and he served in Japan, Korea, and China, trying cases. And he slept through a battle. Ask me sometime, I'll tell you that story. It's where I get my propensity for falling asleep. Chris can tell you that. Here's the island. As you can see, the 3rd, 4th, and 5th Marine Corps divisions, it lays out when they landed, what progress they made. Mount Suribachi, the extinct volcano down at the bottom there on the left, and Katano Point, the last area that the Japanese held before this, well, who was left of them, surrendered. And there were some that were left. A lot of men are still on that island, both American and Japanese. That is a war grave. It's sacred ground. It was fought and won by our brave Marines in the most costly battle the Marine Corps has ever had in its entire history. Another thing about the Battle of Iwo Jima, there were more underage Marines who died in that battle than any other battle. Now, we have some World War II folks here. Sadly, we're losing them, aren't we, day by day. But back in the day, when I've spoken to the World War II vets, they've always told me that they were real gung-ho. They really wanted to serve. So they had to figure out a way to fool the recruiter. And one veteran told me, he said, I was 17 years old when I went to the recruiter. But before I went into his office, I took a little piece of paper. I wrote the number 18 on it, and I put it inside my shoe. So when he was standing in front of the recruiter, and the recruiter said, son, are you over 18? Yes, sir, I'm over 18. That was one method. But that's why we call them the greatest generation. I mean, no offense to the current generation, but I can't see any of these kids doing something like that. Can you? Probably not, unless you've raised them right, which I'm sure you have. So, after the battle, when it was released, the information that these underage Marines, so many of them fought and died, there was a hue and cry here in America for the military to tighten up their recruitment process and protocols so that there wouldn't be young teenagers going into the teeth of hell. But they did. And because they did, we're here. Now, pardon me for just a moment, but I'm going to call up a video that will give you basically the entire battle. And it's not an hour long, don't worry. I just have to get it up here on my computer. I should have had it wait. So talk amongst yourselves. Everybody having a good lunch? Awesome. I noticed you're getting it from Chick-fil-A. Yeah, I love Chick-fil-A. All right. And here we go. Oh, wait a minute, I'm sorry. Probably couldn't stop. Remember the old days when the TV would go on the Fritz and you'd see these color bars and stuff like that? You don't hear that? That's okay. That's all right. I don't think we're going to get this way on time. Okay. My apologies to all of you. Technical difficulties that I could not get that video to play. But it's on YouTube. So if you go on YouTube and you search for Battle of Iwo Jima and you see that image, that will tell you in a very short time the story of the battle, the complete story of the battle. Unfortunately, I do not have that all memorized, so I can't recall everything to you, but I do have photographs that we'll be looking at, and we can talk about those. Remember what I said about asking the pastor a sermon or a reflection? This will make the reflection even shorter. There's the island. You see before you there on the left side of the screen is Mount Surpachi. There's a huge crater up there. And the ships you see in the water in front of them are our ships. This was taken at some point during the battle. And there are the invasion waves going in on the landing craft and the LVTs, the alligators, the retract vehicles. There was, I don't know how many days of bombardment prior to this. Plus, the island had been attacked continuously over the previous months. There were battleships that resurrected from Pearl Harbor that were shelling that island. You all know about the USS Texas, the oldest battleship I think that we have. It's still in the museum. That was there, firing her guns. They're the Marines making their way onto the island. The island is shrouded in explosions from the artillery and the ships that were bombarding it and the B-24 Liberators that were dropping bombs. These men in these landing craft, they had been told the battle would maybe be 3 days. More like 3 weeks plus. They felt, rightly so, nothing could survive the bombardment we had laid upon that island. But none of them knew that that island was a fortress, an impregnable one, with miles of tunnels and caves and fighting positions that were hidden. Oh, they wiped out anything that was out in the open. We wiped that out. But they had that island covered by their artillery, the Japanese. There's Suribachi again. You can see the first wave coming in, second and third, and then the others will follow behind it. They got on the island. No one had told Marines that the beaches were volcanic ash. Now, have you ever tried running on a beach, sandy beach? Not the easiest thing to do, right? Good exercise, though, but not easy to do. Volcanic ash is 10 times worse than running on sand. On sand, you can dig, and you can dig yourself a slip trench or something to dive into when the artillery comes in. You couldn't do that here. The ash would just fill back in. And it bogged everyone down. Tanks, LVTs, individual Marines had to struggle to get off of that beach. Nobody knew. But that did not stop them, did it? They kept going. They did not give up. And here they are with Suribachi in the background. You can see the Marines here in the foreground. Some of those men are dead. Many of them are trying to get as close deep down into the ground as possible. They made it up over that berm, and it was devastation in front of them because we had shelled every piece of vegetation off of that island. Today, that island is covered in vegetation. But then, it was a wasteland. The Japanese held their fire until we had established a good, strong beachhead, and it started to move inland. And then they let loose the hounds of hell upon these young men. And the stories I heard from the veterans and the things I've studied and read, it was beyond anything that you and I can imagine. You know, if you have the honor of talking to a World War II veteran, the guys and the women who served in Europe, it was a totally different war. It sort of sounds like an oxymoron to say it was a more civilized war, not that the SS were civilized, they weren't. But in the Pacific, it was bestial. Horrible. And if you were taken prisoner, of course, here, no Americans were taken prisoner here, but you would be lucky to survive in that POW camp. It's a different war. A different war than the war in Europe. Matter of fact, that's why some historians call it the World Wars. Not just World War II, but the World Wars. Because they were very, very different. And the Japanese were an enemy that we had, like no other enemy we had ever faced. You heard about the banzai charges? The Japanese commander forbid those on Iwo until the very last days of the battle. They would rush the lines of the Marines who were firing their 30 and 50 caliber machine guns out over them. And they just kept coming. They kept dropping. Kamikazes. You've heard of those. They were special air units in the Japanese Air Force. They trained these pilots to fly their planes into the American ships. And their planes were laden with fuel and bombs. 100 kamikaze could take off after one of our fleets, and we could shoot down 99 of them. But the one that got through could sink an aircraft carrier. This is what these men were facing. Not just a tenacious enemy, but a fanatical enemy. And here they are, trying to get off that beach. There's the larger landing ships. I think they were LSTs, landing ship tank, that were unloading everything there. This Suribachi again, you can see all the men hunkered down. I mentioned earlier that my dad befriended a lot of the Marines who fought on Iwo Jima. And for many years, I accompanied him to their reunions, 3rd, 4th, and 5th Marine Corps divisions, who invited my dad, who was Army Air Corps. But because he was on the island, chief physical officer, he had befriended a lot of the Marines, they invited us to their reunions down in Mississippi and Alabama. I sat with these men. This was back in the 80s. I sat with these men and wept with them as they told me the stories of what they had seen and done and endured, and how they had seen their best buddies killed right in front of them. I remember one particular story. A veteran, a Marine, was hunkered down like these gentlemen are, and he was looking behind him, and he could see a landing craft come in that had a huge Red Cross flag on it, and they were loading wounded. And the medics were getting on board with them. They had people on board to help them. And he watched them load, and they pulled away, and as they started to head out towards one of the hospital ships, they took a direct hit. And he told me, 1 second I'm looking at that landing craft going out, the next second it's gone. Completely obliterated. Nothing left but empty water. And he wept when he saw that. We can't imagine what they went through and what they saw, and were willing to do for us at great cost, not only of their lives, but of their souls, their spirit. I wanted to be a Marine, but my mother said no military. I wanted to be a police officer. No, not going to do that. And Chris has always said to me, can you listen to your mother? I was a good little soldier. I was an old man when I was 5. I did what my mother told me. Here they are, again, trying to get up there. Get off the beach. The commanders are yelling, get the hell off this beach. They were trying. Now there's a Sherman, a Marine Corps Sherman, and it's making its way up. Quite a number of them got up on the island, and thank God they did. But still, they were zeroed in by the Japanese artillery too. And here's one that got stuck in a ditch. Now, notice, let's see if I can get this thing. Notice on the back of the tank, we're looking at the aft end of the tank, you see like a rectangular funnel type of thing. That's part of the fording kit that they use to make the tank amphibious. The exhaust would come out of that port. The intake trunk would be in front of it towards the turret, but it's obviously gone there. They took it down so they could use the gun and traverse the turret. Now, there's something else I want you to look at. On the sides of the tank, it looks like they've got some sort of extra armor. Can you see that? Maybe I can borrow your, thank you. Very much. Right here, it looks like there's an extra layer of armor. Can anyone tell me what that armor is made out of? Aluminum? No, it wasn't aluminum. No, it wasn't steel. Wood. I'll talk about that in a minute. These are some of the fighting positions where the Japanese had mortars and machine guns. And our guys would come across this desolate landscape, and the Japanese would be shooting them shooting at them from these caves. Imagine running up on that beach with all that stuff on your back. Incredible. I certainly couldn't do that today. Could have done it when I was 16 either, but anyway. Look at the desolation. That used to all be tropical flora and fauna. Completely, it's like the surface of the moon. And yet the Japanese were still there. This is the remains of part of a blockhouse in this area here. We think of it as just a flat, like a pool table. It wasn't. There were many cliffs and gullies and all sorts of terrain that the Marines had to traverse. And here you see a group of Marines in front of one of those pillboxes that has been completely demolished. Flamethrowers. The men had to use those that shoot into the caves and into the fighting positions where the Japanese were. The most fearsome weapon on all sides of the war. Imagine how brave that Marine is. He's got those tanks on his back, and they're not armored. They're not bulletproof. Matter of fact, I remember talking to one Marine who was a flamethrower man. He said, I always wondered if Japanese would shoot me in between the tanks and shoot me in the back. He said, I think that would be a lot better than if they shot the tanks and I burned to death. Thankfully, he survived. And the Shermans got involved with this. You know, that's one thing about the Marine Corps throughout its history. They've always been innovative. They always do field modifications to their armor, their weapons, their vehicles, their uniforms. That Sherman is firing that plane into the caves that they discovered on some of those cliffs. There's my favorite tank again. Now this is the tank. I don't know where this is. I should have looked at the caption. But this is what I was talking about the wood. This tank, I don't know if it actually fought on Iwo Jima, but it's configured to look like a Sherman that fought on Iwo Jima. Now, you see all this here. Can everybody see that? Am I standing either way? That's all wood along the sides and along the bogies and everything down here. Anybody want to take a guess why wood? Why would they put wood? No, that's a good answer, but unfortunately that's not it. Anybody else have an idea? Float? No, I'm sorry, it would take a heck of a lot more wood to float the Sherman tank, that's for sure. No? And then up here they have sandbags. Anybody else before I tell you why? Coal mines? Yes. Mines. Magnetic mines. The Japanese would, and they learned this the hard way, the Marines did. And in previous battles they had on the island hopping campaign across the Pacific, the Japanese would run up to the tank and attach a magnetic mine. They also had them in Europe. It was part of the fighting there too. But here, that was a defense that the Marines came up with. That didn't come from ordnance or from Washington or whoever. They thought of that. So they covered the sides with wood. Now, it's hard to see here maybe for some of you, but up on the top of the turret, you can see these spikes, and there's some here. Anybody have an idea why there's spikes up there? That's right. Thank you, ma'am. A+. She said the spikes were there. If the enemy tried to climb up on the tank, they'd be pierced by those spikes. They couldn't get to the hatches. They couldn't attach anything to it. So they came up with these innovative answers to problems that they were having learned the hard way in battle. Another detail about the Sherman. You see these here are on the tracks? Anybody know what they are? They're called duckbills. They were attached to the outside of each of the tracks to help spread the weight of the tank on soft ground. It was called flotation. So that helped them get through. And that did help with the sand, the volcanic ash as well. Do you know there were 2 flags that were raised on Mount Suribachi? This is the first one. But that flag was too small and couldn't be seen by everyone on the island. Matter of fact, when they raised that flag, those that could see it were cheering. And the ships out around the island all sounded their horns. And men were firing into the air. Anybody know why Iwo Jima was so precious to the Japanese? The what? I'm sorry? Close to Hawaii. No, that's a good guess. Iwo Jima was part of the Tokyo Prefecture. This was Japanese soil. And that's why they defended it to the last man. And there's Joe Rosenthal's famous photograph of the flag race that has become the symbol, really, of the Marine Corps. This was the second flag. It was much bigger and could be seen much further. Joe Rosenthal was up there with a cameraman named, I think, Bill Janess. Bill was taking movies and Joe was taking stills. And they were talking to each other and they wanted to make sure they weren't standing in each other's way, and they almost missed this. Janess got the entire flag raising on film, and I'm sorry, I was hoping to show that to you. And Rosenthal snapped this picture. There was a lot of controversy about this picture. Some people claimed it was staged, and it wasn't. Rosenthal himself, and you can imagine, still in the middle of this battle. And Rosenthal was asked about some later pictures, if he staged them, and he said yes. But they were asking him about this picture, and that started the myth, the rumor, that he had staged this. It was not staged. We're going to talk about the flag races in a little bit. Now here they are taking down the first flag, and the second flag is already up. This is the stage picture that Rosenthal took. I think this Marine over here looks like Ira Hayes. I think that might be him. There was a lot of controversy in later years, in the late 90s and into the 2000s, about the identity of all the flag raisers. And just grab something over here. Now you can imagine that flag appearing at the top of Mount Suribachi not only gave our Marines more energy and more spirit to keep fighting, but it enraged the Japanese. And they came out and conducted some bonsai charges because they were so furious that we had planted Old Glory on Tokyo land. There's Joe Rosenthal himself, looking out over the invasion beach. Look at all the ships out there. You know, these war correspondents, they're brave people. They weren't armed, they weren't combatants. But they could get, and many have died down through the wars that we had in the 20th century. They have died covering these battles. Okay. Now, this is something that I'm not happy about because I'm an amateur historian. You know, I'm 66. Going to be 67 in 2 months. And I was taught in school about these guys and who they were. But research has been done since then. And some of the flag raisers that were named back then and were all the way through until the mid-2000s, it was found that they weren't the real flag raisers. And one of them was a gentleman I met, Rene Gagnon. He was from New Hampshire. You know his name? Have you heard it before? Well, when I was about 7 years old, I met him. It was 7 or 8. 1965, which was the 20th anniversary of the battle. My dad, who was state commander of the Disabled American Veterans in Massachusetts, got together with the Marine Corps League and they organized the first Iwo Jima Day in the state capitol, in the Hall of Flags, as they called it, where flags were on display. And Rene Gagnon was there. And I shook his hand. And unfortunately, I've had to wash this hand many, many times since. It's one of my heroes. And as in 2016, they determined that he was not one of the flag raisers. However, he was responsible for making sure the flags got up on the mountain and back down safely later. And he was there. And I got his signature. This is actually a copy. I'll talk about this book in a moment. So, the first flag raising, the one we saw in those first pictures, Harold Schreier, Ernest Thomas, Henry Hansen, Charles Lindbergh, not the Charles Lindbergh that we know, John Bradley and Phil Ward were the first flag raisers. Now, you notice the different colors and the names. The colors that are in red did not survive the battle. The names that were in blue did. 6 men who raised the second flag were Ira Hayes, he was a Native American. Harold Schultz, again correctly identified in June 2016, previously identified as John Bradley. John Bradley was one of the first flag raisers, but not the second. Michael Strank, Franklin Sousley, Harold Keller, and again, he was correctly identified in 2019, replacing Rene Gagnon, and Harold Block. And again, the names in red did not survive the battle. Now, Rene Gagnon, as I mentioned, had an important part in this, so it wasn't that he wasn't there and wasn't doing things and wasn't part of it, he was. But you know, in the heat of battle, in the middle of all that, they went with what they had. And of course, the survivors came back here and were part of war bond drives. They're all gone now. But they made a huge mark in history, and indeed in the hearts of Americans, then and now. And there's Bill Janos, I'm sorry, he was the combat cameraman. He was killed on Iwo Jima, and his body was never found. I read one account that he was in one of the caves, had gone into one of the caves, because, you know, these were combat Marines. They weren't just taking pictures. Joe Rosenthal wasn't a Marine, but he was, and he was killed in action, and they think his body is still on the island in a cave somewhere. His remains. You know what this plane is? B-29, that's right. And the name of that plane, named by her crew, was Dynamite. This was the first B-29 to land on Iwo Jima, and it was during the battle. The battle was still going on. And they had an emergency, and they landed, and look at all the Marines surrounding it. This is part of what they all fought and died for. This is another historical controversy that many people of late, many historians of late, have questioned the value of Iwo Jima to our war effort. And I think the value is priceless. Here's the B-29 that crashed on the island. Now this is later. This is much, much long after the battle. You can see a tent in the background there. They came in and crash landed and caught fire. This was dangerous. Iwo Jima, if it wasn't there, these crews would have died. They never would have made it back to their bases in the Marianas or Guam. But they had Iwo Jima to land on. When my father served on the island, as I said, he was there, arrived the night after they declared the island secure. Every single person and every single military person on that island had to do duty on the flight line. And he was out there many, many times, rushing out in jeeps and ambulances and trucks to rescue airmen out of these burning planes. Come to think of it, that may have been where I got the fire card. Became a firefighter, I don't know. Now this picture, again, this is when the air base was in complete operation. You can see a B-29 here. You know what these planes are in the front? P-51 Mustangs, that's right. And they were based there too. The historians that I dislike are looking strictly at the B-29 statistics. How many men were saved by Iwo Jima being there? And it was upwards of 27,000 that were saved. But they just look at the B-29s. They forget about you know what the bomber pilots call these guys? They're friends. They were their escort. They were there. And their lives were saved too because Iwo was there. We had that island. Here's another B-29 that came in and crashed into a group of P-51s, and they're burning. And I love this photograph because there's a Jeep. You see these men over here. One of them could be my dad. Because he, as I said, he had, like everyone else, even though at that time he was a lieutenant, everybody, no matter their rank, had to do time on the flight line. And these guys are waiting for the firefighters to arrive and the fire to die down before they can go in and try to pull guys out. Anybody know what this plane is? Absolutely, another A+ over here. P-61 Norfolk built those Black Widows. They were night fighters. What an awesome looking airplane. I don't think I'd want to look down the business end of that thing, do you? But they would go out at night, they had radar, and they would hunt the Japanese planes. They were based on the island too. And those historians simply look at the B-29 statistics, but they don't look at these guys. So, Those Marines did not die in vain. We would not have been able to press the war home to the Japanese without that honor. You all know what that is. You got one right over here. That's right. Now that happens to be an older model of the P-47. That's the Razorback. It has a different canopy and a fairing on the back and on the top. Your P-47 has a bubble top. At least the later version. You know the nickname of that plane? Other than Hoosier Spirit. The Jug. That's right. That is my favorite World War II fighter. Now, I'm not just saying this because you have one. The Jug, big, powerful. That thing could take punishment and bring their pilots home. It was an incredible, incredible plane. It still is. And thank you guys. Thank this museum for preserving these important artifacts. I hate to call them artifacts. It makes them sound real ancient, doesn't it? You keep these planes alive. You keep them flying. That's important for the younger generations to see these. It brings the war into three-dimensional reality to have these here and to display them and to fly them. When Chris and I were here last year, none of this was here, because I know you had that, a storm that had ripped off the roof of the hangar or whatever. And so when I walked through that door over there and I saw them, I'm like, oop, they're home. That's great. And there's my dad and his team. That's my dad in the middle. My dad was in his mid-30s when he served. He was an old man. The guys he had under his command, late teens, early 20s, they called him the old man, not just because he was their commanding officer, but he was older. But this is their headquarters where they did all their work. That team would compile information about all the bombing runs, all the battle damage assessments, all the bomb damage assessments. And this is a copy, the original I donated to the Air Force Museum in Dayton. This is a copy of the summary that his team put together of all combat operations from March 4th through August 18th at Iwo Jima. You know what they say when you do research, you go to primary sources? I don't know if those historians look at this, but this will tell you the story of what the Marines did so that we could win the war. Can you tell I feel very strongly about this? Another task that my dad and his unit had was to go through, and he did this on his own. He wasn't ordered to do this. He and his men went through the cemetery that was on Iwo Jima, where all of our dead were buried. And they cataloged the entire cemetery. And they produced this book, and this is a copy of it. My dad made, I don't know how many copies of these, and it has all the names, their ranks, of all the men who were buried on Iwo Jima. They're no longer there. They were disinterred and reinterred back here in the States, many of them at Arlington. And as you may remember, I think 1968, we gave the island, or maybe it was 65, I can't remember now. We gave the island back to Japan. I have mixed feelings about that too, but anyway. Japan is now our ally. I'm going to make another statement here. Throughout history, there has never been a nation who vanquished their enemies to such an extent as we and the Allies did to the Japanese and the Germans. No other nation went back in and rebuilt both those countries. Now, and this is an interesting fact. When we rebuilt Japan and Germany, to make them the amazing nations they are today. They started with 1945 technology. We were still using late 19th century technology back home. No other nation in history has done that. None. So when I say I'm proud to be an American, that's one of the reasons. And you can take that to the bank. Thank you for the applause, but those men deserve more than just that. Thank you. I had a video of the Medal of Honor recipients. There were 27 of them on the island that fought on the island that were awarded, the majority of them posthumously. And this is one of my favorite Marines. Anybody know who he is? Oh, no, my dad wasn't a Marine. No, but thank you. No, that's not, he does look a little bit like my dad, but that's not my dad. No, my dad was Army Air Force. That's John Bassalon. He was awarded the Medal of Honor for his bravery and incredible strength and courage on Guadalcanal, that first island battle that we had in the Pacific, the Americans had. He went home to do war bond tours, and there's a depiction of him on the cover of Collier's magazine. He had been through hell already. And you don't get the Medal of Honor for nothing. And you know what he said? What he said to his commanders? I want to go back to my boys. He didn't have to. He could have stayed here. He could have lived with his family. He could have lived to a ripe old age. But he went back. And do you know where he died? On Iwo Jima. I think the first day of the battle. He epitomizes a problem that we had losing that many men on that island. Because many of those men were hardened veterans. They had been on the island hopping campaign since it started. We lost so many valuable fighters on that island. However, they were replaced by the men who became hardened in combat on Iwo Jima and went on to fight, and many of them died, on Okinawa. Do you think our culture today understands this? Not enough. And I think that's a good reason why the Evansville Wartime Museum exists, to tell the story of these men, and women too, through the displays and the artifacts, through that wonderful P-47 over there, through this Spearman. We can't forget these men and what they did. I had some beautiful music playing in the background here. Sorry, I didn't bring all the cables I should have. This is a composite photograph. But what you see here, first of all, that's a picture that's been superimposed of the Marines on the beach. There's Suribachi. There's an American flagpole, and this is the cemetery where all these men were buried. And this picture was the dedication of the ceremony. And there's all the Marines and all the men, all the people on the island, honoring their fallen comrades. That's quite a picture, isn't it? Chester W. Nimitz, the famous admiral, his quote, "Among the men who fought on Iwo Jima, uncommon valor was a common virtue." And that says everything about the Marines, doesn't it? Especially about the Iwo Jima Marines. And that's why his boat is on the Iwo Jima Memorial in Washington, which is the depiction of the second flag raising, Joe Rosenthal's photograph. Thank you all so much for your kind attention. Probably ran over time, I apologize for that, but I'm willing to take any questions. I can't guarantee I have the answers, but as I said, I encourage you to do the research and learn more about them. Yes, sir. How did they pick the pilots? Well, they went through training. Actually, that plane over there was probably one of the trainers that they used, and that particular airplane I'm sure was used for training. But they had to go through ground school. They had to go through pilot training in these aircraft. They worked their way up to the T-6, the Texan, and then from that to the fighters. So it was a long process, and they had to study and they had to know what they were doing, and they had to know the mechanics of these planes, the mechanical aspects of it, not just how to pilot. It's hard enough to fly, but can you imagine learning to fly and fight? That is amazing. I know I could do it. I wanted to be a fighter pilot. Nothing my mother said no to. There's no way I could have done it. First of all, I get bad air sickness. But it was not an easy. Any of these tasks that these men did, and women too, during World War II, was just amazing. You think of how the technology had advanced from World War I to World War II, and it wasn't a long time. It was incredible. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm wondering how many Japanese, you know, like how many total stuff?
Right. Yeah, there were more Japanese that were killed than there were Marines and Navy personnel. I would have to look that up here, but this was something else I wanted to recommend, and I'll have it up here. And if you would like to have copies of the stuff I've done and brought in, including the presentation, give your email address to these great folks here. They'll get it to me and I'll send it to you. In answer to your question, I think 27,000. I thought there was a chart in this. I can't find it. I'm sorry. This is why I failed. I was a history minor too, but I fail at this, so I apologize for that. But that information is readily available online. Thank you. Thanks for the question. Anyone else? Yes, way in the back.
Are you saying that there is still a cemetery on Iwo Jima with the bodies of those killed there?
No, they're not. The entire cemetery, they were all disinterred and moved to the United States when we gave the island back to Japan. So there are no formal graves. However, there's so many men whose remains are on that island that will never be found, including the Japanese who were sealed up in those caves and tunnels. Down there?
I just have a comment about that memorial in Washington, D.C.
Talk a little.
Many of you have been on honor flights, you know what I'm going to say. But it's unique because when you take the buses and you go around that memorial, it looks like, as they travel, it looks like they're raising that flag.
Oh, wow. Thank you, sir. He's talking about the memorial in Washington, D.C. There's sort of an optical effect. If you walk around the base of that and you're looking up at it, it almost looks like they're moving and raising the flag. Thank you, sir. I've never heard that before. That's amazing. One in the back.
Yes, sir. The Japanese, if I'm not mistaken, only allows one airplane once a year with passengers on it to visit Iwo Jima. That's a mistake.
Yes.
we should be allowed to be there at any time we want to. And
Absolutely.
fly there. But once a year, you get 125 people that are chosen and pay their way to get there, and they're allowed there for 4 hours. Now, if that's our friends,
I know, you're right.
20,000?
He's right about that. I don't know if you could hear him, but he said only one time a year do the Japanese allow a plane full of folks to visit Iwo Jima. And it's about 125 people.
25, they have to pay their own
And
way.
they pay their own way to go out there to see it, and they can only be there for 4 hours.
$12,000 to $20,000 I hear. A piece.
My dad visited there on the 40th anniversary in 1985. Matter of fact, he appears in one of the documentaries they did about the visit. And it was around the same time that I was going to the reunions, and I saw a lot of the guys that were in the film. I met them, I talked with them for several years. And my dad's in the documentary, he's not talking, but you can see he was presenting some artifacts he brought back. He brought back this Japanese helmet that had a bullet hole in it. He brought back a knee mortar. You may know what those are? We thought they were knee mortars. The Japanese had them, they buried them in the sand, and they fired them. A lot of our guys thought that they fit over their thigh, and they became casualties when they tried to fire them. You have a knee mortar here? Oh, wonderful. All right. My dad donated that and a Japanese officer's, footlocker to the Imperial Museum in Tokyo in 1985. And many of the Marines who were on that reunion also donated artifacts. Do you know the only display before 1985 that the Japanese had in their Imperial Museum regarding the Battle of Iwo Jima was a pair of socks. They didn't want to admit what happened, obviously. But you're right, they should allow more people to visit that island and appreciate what these men went through. Yeah. Right. You know, that's a very good question, because when I first learned about this, I had that same question in my mind. What he just asked was, Gagnon and Bradley and Ira Hayes came back to the States in war bond drives. They traveled all over the country. The movie that Clint Eastwood made, Flags of Our Fathers, based on the book that was written, it deals with all that. He asked me, did Gagnon and Bradley ever correct the history and say, wait a minute, that wasn't us? Not to my knowledge. And if they did, they were probably told by their commanders not to say that. So, it's all about good propaganda. Anyway, good question, thank you. And all of them are gone, so we can't answer that. Yes, sir. Wow. Gentleman just shared a story about a friend of his that's served in the Navy, was aboard a ship that docked at Iwo Jima, and they allowed the crew, some of the crew, to go on to the island for a while. So apparently our Navy may stop there occasionally. But again, it's restricted to the civilians can't go there. Yes, sir.
Part of the reason that the Japanese don't want people there is they consider the whole island a sacred cemetery.
That's a very good point. Thank you, sir, very much for bringing that to attention. Remember I said how the island is a war grave. The Japanese consider it to be a very holy place because the majority of all the Japanese that were killed, their remains are still there. So it is a war grave. Thank you. And we need to respect that too. When my dad went back there in 1985, the trip was organized by a Japanese Iwo Jima veteran who had become a I think he had become a priest, not Christian. It might have been Shinto or it might have been Hindu. At any rate, this veteran organized the reunion on the island. And the men and survivors of the men, their families, gathered on opposite sides on the beach. And there was a memorial there. And they came together. And as I said, there's many documentaries done about that. My dad was there. And I can remember talking to one of the Marines after that trip, the next reunion, who told me, he said, you know, I went all the way out there, I wanted to go there, I wanted to be there. But I could not walk across that sand and shake the hands of the enemy that had been so bitterly fighting us, that had killed so many of my friends. Wounds are very hard to heal. Yes, sir.
I've been here before and said this, but my dad was a Marine Division, landed on Iwo Jima.
God bless his soul.
He
God
was
bless him.
wounded and went on to fight in Saipan, Virginia, and was very young out.
Wow. His father fought on Iwo Jima as a Marine and went on to fight on other island campaigns. And God rest his soul. I'm assuming he's in heaven now. Amen. You'll see him someday again. Thank you. Over here. Browsers, that's right, the duck bill.
Those browsers that were put on those things, we made hundreds of thousands of them.
That is awesome. Thank you. I didn't realize that. The browsers, the duckbills you saw that helped extend the width of the Sherman tank tracks, they were built right here in Evansville. Hundreds of thousands of them. Woo! I think that's awesome. Of course, you're well known for the production of the P-47, so add that to it. The LSTs too, that's right, yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Actually made more bullets than anybody else.
Who made more bullets than anyone else? Evansville did. Wow. Evansville is one of the reasons we won the war. Amen. Amen. That's right. Thank you, ma'am. Boy, I love Evansville. Too bad we live so far away, Chris.
Come on down.
Well,
Come on down.
3 hours. I know. You know, I come from Massachusetts. All right, first of all, please don't hold that against me. But you can fit 5 states the size of Massachusetts in Indiana. So I am still getting used to the geography here and the topography, and I love it. I love the Midwest. I love Indiana. Welcome, and I'm proud to be a Hoosier. Transplant, of course. But my wife, Chris, is a born and bred Hoosier. Fort Wayne. 40-year veteran nurse. Worked in Indy for about 20 years and Mass General Hospital in Boston for about 20 years. So she's the reason I'm here. And I will always be grateful for that. Yes, that's right. It popped up. Oh, yes.
We're glad to have you, Bob.
Thank you. Jennifer, I have a presentation that Chris and I are making to the museum. Jennifer, if you wouldn't mind coming forward, please. Thank you. This is from Chris and I to all of you in gratitude for what you do here at the Evansville Military Museum, the Wartime Museum, and for inviting us to be part of this day with all of you, and inviting me to tell the story of my father. First of all, this was my dad's. It's a 48 star flag. It wasn't his casket flag, but it's a 48 star, and it's well worn. And underneath that, I have a shadow box that I created that tells the story of the battle. There's a container here with ash that my dad brought back in 1945 from the invasion beach. And a slice of a brick that the Japanese had made to line their tunnels and caves. So I present this to the museum in gratitude for all you are doing for keeping the story of these men alive. God bless.
This will bring a lot of energy and enthusiasm to the museum. I think we need to live here to promote it. And so, in behalf of the over 150 volunteers that we have that work here, and that give all their time, we just had someone, a Marine, he said, "You don't have to thank me, but I've spent hours and hours on fixing the roof that's on top of our, 1950 kitchen." And he was just sweating with drip. So I'm just saying, there's behind the scenes that people don't see. So thank you, Bob. You promote us well. Thanks to all of our volunteers. And Mark, I do have to thank the Bronstein Foundation. If you did not make these, stand again, Mark. Because if the Bronstein, we bring you up at every talk. We just didn't bring this up because you're here. But if we did not have the extra money that you give, that we can have these talks, this is what brings the people. Community, fellowship, and food always brings it. And because of that, we've developed friendships. We've had volunteers come forward. We've had donations. All of that comes full circle to help us in so many ways. So again, let Judge Trockman and the rest of your team know that we really appreciate what you've done for us. Okay? Thank you again. I knew when I met him last year that he was going to be a great speaker. So,
thanks.
Hey, thank you.
I was vaccinated with phonograph needle, I guess.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you all. God bless you, keep you, and enjoy the rest of your day.